Say one or two sort of personal reflections about why I think today is so significant and interesting. One of my earliest memories as a young boy was a conversation I had with my mother, who said to me, "Paul, do you know what patriarchy is?" And I said, "No, Mama, I don't know what patriarchy is." And she said, "Patriarchy is when men systematically discriminate against women." I said, "I understand that." And then she said, "And do you know why patriarchy is necessary?" And I said, "I don't know why it's necessary, Mama." And said, "Because if you put men and women on a level playing field, women would always win." She always used to say that within a twinkle in her eye, but as early as I can remember, it's schooled into me is a sense that we live in a world in which injustices continue to be present, and they need to be recognized, called out, identified, and addressed. And I think the evidence in the world is sort of self-evident. We saw during the pandemic what happened in countries that had women leaders. I am incredibly confident that we would not see the events unfolding in Ukraine at this moment if we had women leaders. And this is not to essentialize women. Women are capable of making tragic and terrible mistakes and being bad leaders. But it is to say that a whole series of pro-social beneficial outcomes would undoubtedly be advanced if women were allowed to compete with men as equals, and then all the consequences that my mother correctly predicted would flow from that. And I think the world would benefit from that, quite frankly. So when we set up the Conduit, one of our kind of principles was we would build a community that is 50-50 men and women. We would program around this area and be very attentive to it. We would think about structural and systemic discrimination, and we'd also think about all the ways in which you can leverage the remarkable contribution that women make to the world on a daily basis. So I am very, very, very happy and honored and excited to be in this very august company and to be able to say a few words of official welcome, to which I now turn to my...
Can I invite Helena Popal, who's also among our panelists. Hi, Helena, join us.
I was standing in your seat as a poor form.
That's why I was waiting there.
No, that's good. Okay, so Athena 40 was officially launched at UNESCO on International Women's Day in March of 2018 as a women-led platform promoting the work of innovative women from around the world. It has been a vision of the founder, Elizabeth Filippouli, a Conduit member, to create a platform that can amplify the voices of women across different countries. In less than 5 years, and against a global pandemic, Athena 40 has developed into a family of initiatives focusing on strengthening the role of women worldwide and nurturing accountable leadership. And at this very moment, some 50 leading women are part of this event with an audience of more than 1,000 influencers in Europe, the US, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, debating live today on International Women's Day. And this conversation today in this setting is obviously here at the Conduit, and we will be connecting with people in other participating cities. In such an uncertain world today, we're looking to see where the major challenges and opportunities for women lie and how women can promote peace and collaboration while getting on decision-making positions. And with that, I'm going to hand over to our host and the convener and a treasured Conduit member, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your hospitality and for everything that you do to support women. And it's a privilege to be here today as Athena 40, as Global Thinkers Forum, to be a member of the Conduit Club, which is the only club in that social impact space, which is so much needed. Having said that, I will encourage you to visit the exhibition on your left, where you will see some 20 portraits of incredible women trailblazers. They have been the work of Sebastian Better, and the whole idea is to connect our different, our diverse and rich narratives and create an overall narrative of understanding, tolerance, diversity. So today we're going to discuss women as catalysts of resilience and change. And that was my vision when I launched Athena 4 years ago, in 2008. Did someone say anything? Freddie, you wanted to say something? No? All right. Well, before we get there, just to share a brief anecdote about patriarchy and how my father raised me. I'm an only child. And so friends, were asking my dad, a Greek father, and Greek friends, whether he would have liked, to have a son. And his response was, well, I have 10 sons with her. So he was always someone who would encourage creativity, and he would always say that there's no dream that is not achievable, no matter how high the goal. Always do your best, always perform at your best, and always aim high. So here we are today. Before we start our Connect live with Ukraine first, and then with the different countries around the world, and then, of course, having this conversation with the trailblazing women in the room, I would like us to watch the video. Freddie, thank you. And thank you for all the work, by the way. You're an amazing team.
Welcome to Athena 40. Athena 40 is a family of initiatives that promote female leadership and invite all leaders to embrace visionary and innovative thinking. By innovative thinking, we mean being open, curious, and solutions-focused. Athena 40 works closely with some of the most dynamic and innovative minds across all industries in order to promote gender diversity, inclusion, and bring more women into decision-making roles. We commit to enabling women to contribute to our economies. We believe that compassion and understanding are necessary values for our societies. We promote partnerships and ideas exchange among women, and of course, we include men in all conversations. We fight cliches and tribalism. We propose collaboration instead of segregation. We ignore labels and stereotypes. We recognize the value of diversity as a fantastic source of talent and knowledge. We stand for freedom of thought and expression. Our language speaks the truth. We stand for values-based decision-making, and we fight polarization. We are broad-minded and inclusive. We believe in meaningful networking and the need to keep lifting each other up. We mentor, inspire, and motivate other women of all ages and backgrounds, helping them discover their own potential. We share and learn from each other's stories. Athena 40 welcomes everyone who wishes to be part of our mission and initiatives, an international community of vision, an ongoing global conversation, a movement for compassionate, innovative, future-proof leadership. Join us.
And right now, as Paul said, we are connecting with Birmingham, Zagreb, Beirut, Amman, Dubai, and Karachi. And the whole idea is to try and understand what is happening in different parts of the world, in different societies than ours. That's why we created Athena 40. Before we get there, let me try to connect to Ukraine. This is the country where everyone is having their eyes on, and of course, our prayers. Ina, you're there. So, hello, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Thank you for joining us. I'm going to do a brief introduction. So Ina was a mentee on the Athena mentoring program.
Hello, can you hear us?
Can we please mute all other cities and just keep Ina unmuted? Thank you. Thank you so much. So Ina is the co-founder of a startup providing online English courses to young professionals in Ukraine. She represented her country to the UN in 2015 as a youth delegate and was a fellow to the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She delivered 2 statements at the UN on social, humanitarian affairs and human rights, and she graduated from the Athena mentoring program in 2020 at the age of 29. She is now married and she has a 7-week-old baby, Sviatoslav, if I'm pronouncing his name right. He was baptized today. And since February the 25th, she and her family, they live in a war zone. So I reached out to Ina. We had a profound conversation last Sunday, and I said I would like you to deliver a message to us on International Women's Day, because we're talking about celebrations, but what is happening in Ukraine doesn't allow us to celebrate. This is a time for serious concern, and we're all concerned. And this is a time for action, more than ever before, perhaps. Ina, can I invite you to give a message? Ina, can you hear us? Has the image frozen or the connection is frozen? Yes. Please bear with us. It's technology playing up.
I'm back.
Yes, you are. And we're all listening to you. Please go ahead.
Thanks a million for having me here. My name is Ina. I'm 31. I'm a mom and I'm a Ukrainian. Right now I'm staying in my home city, Vinnytsia, which is only 270 kilometers away from Kyiv, and it's kind of safe here now. This is my home, the house built by my dad, and the place where I feel the most loving and loved. And after having studied and done internships and working in different countries in Europe and in the US, I decided to go back home. And to some of my peers, this decision seemed a little bit too crazy and ridiculous back then, because I could have pursued my career in any international organization or company like the UN or Google. But my choice and my heart was here because Ukraine has splendid career opportunities, amazing, talented, hardworking, well-educated people, and I like to be a part of it, and I belong here. That's why my choice was like this. And on Sunday, I was just outside with my baby, breathing some air, as I heard the air raid siren followed by some noise, and I thought this is just the aircraft, which I heard before, but it turned out it was a missile targeting the airport right on the outskirts of my city. As the result, 9 people died and the airport was destroyed entirely. And as of now, 38 children were killed in this war. The youngest of them was just 18 months, and it all started in cities like Kharkiv and Kyiv with the shelling and attacking the military facilities and infrastructure. And the next step was the civilian infrastructure like hospitals, kindergartens and schools and residential areas. And God, I want to be wrong, but I have this nasty feeling that my home city is just one step closer to being shelled in its every corner. And honestly, I don't want to be a refugee, neither this +1 to the dreadful statistics of the killed people. And that's why my Ukrainian fellows, the army, the president, the volunteers do everything possible and impossible in order to have peace and security and the life as we knew it. But it's not only a fight for us Ukrainians, it's honestly the fight for whole Europe and the world, because there is no peace and security with no free, sovereign and independent Ukraine. On the 9th of May, we used to celebrate this Victory Day, claiming never again. But the thing is that the history repeated itself, and there is another crazy dictator with super huge ego and ambitions. And unless we stop him right sooner than the May the 9th, the consequences may be just awful, as too many people are being killed of my people, Ukrainians. And you know, my son's name is Svetoslav, as mentioned before, and in my language, these it consists of two words meaning sviato and slava, which is celebration and glory. And I do hope that way sooner than May, we're gonna have like every family in my country gonna have a huge and happy celebration of free Ukraine, thanks to the glory of my brave and committed people. Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine. Дякую.
Slava Ukraini. Ina, thank you. Can I ask you for a round of applause? We support you, Ina, and we support your cause. And one final remark from you, if I may. When we had our conversation on Sunday, and I asked you about your people and the crisis that you're currently, the nightmare, the hell that you're currently living through, you said to me something which has stayed with me. You said that this is a moment for truth, for Ukrainians and the society to reassess your values and your own sense of belonging. I would like you to repeat that, because I think this is such a strong message for all our societies and all our nations.
Yeah, that's us. Ta-da!
I think we've lost the connection. Can you hear me, Ina? I think we've lost the connection again. You cannot hear me. No.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, I'm back.
Yes, you are. I wonder if you heard what I asked you to repeat, that message which you gave me last Sunday about that momentum, which is history in the making for the whole world. And you said that for Ukrainians, this is a time to reassess your values as society and your sense of belonging.
Yes, I mean, we had so many obstacles and challenges, starting with the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity, and then Crimea and Donbass and everything. And maybe the lesson was not learned well enough for us and for the rest of the world, that we have those values that we stand for. And no matter what, we have to be united as a society. And whenever we have the truth behind us, we have to stand for it till the very end. And what we see now in my country, like everyone is so super motivated and patriotic, doing every single day little tiny things that everyone can do within his or her capacity. But at the end of the day, it all brings us the spirit of shared values and the spirit of upcoming victory. And honestly, I haven't met a person who has any doubt in the victory, because that wasn't us invading our country. We did nothing to the Russian Federation and Mr. Putin himself. So every help that we get, external help, just mobilizes our efforts. And thanks to that, we feel as strong as never before.
Thank you. Well, may peace prevail. Please stay strong as you are and resilient as you are. Thank you, Ina.
Thank you.
And so, can I ask you to come back to your seats? And now it's time to make a round around the world. A bit like the Eurovision, but without music and the outfits. We are going to connect with London first and the Evening Standard. Is that correct? Is Doug Wills there? Actually, I wonder if you should have stayed at the front row. What do you think would be easier? Yeah, sorry for that, back and forth. Yeah. Doug, are you there?
Hello.
You are?
I am here.
Hello.
Hello, can you see me?
No, we cannot see you, sadly. Can we see Doug?
Oh, dear, that's a shame, because it's showing and I'm looking very good.
Yes, we're sure you would.
Okay, my video is recording, or rather is showing, but maybe it seems to be a technical hitch somewhere. So
We can see you now.
there you are.
Yes.
You see me now. Right, hello. Well, welcome to West London, and this is the offices of the Evening Standard, and with the support of the London Press Club. And you can see about me here a panel, and we have a panel of 5, and we're being chaired by Carol Stone, who is a former BBC producer, and we have the executive editor, Dawn, of the Society of Editors. We have Nimco Ali, a columnist and well known for her campaigning. And we have Anna here, and Anna is content editor of the Evening Standard. So all of these panelists are very much supporters of the ethos of today, and hopefully we'll be sorting the world's view accordingly in the next hour or so. So good luck to every panel and at the Conduit Club to all over the world. So good luck and thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Good luck to you. You have a fantastic panel of media executives there. And we're moving on to Zagreb, Croatia, where the panel is moderated by Leonor Stjepic, the CEO of the Montessori Group. Leonor, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, hello, London, and actually hello, Carol, who actually sits on the board of the Montessori Group. So I'm delighted to see her chairing the Evening Standard panel as well. Here in Zagreb, we actually have an invited audience, quite a large invited audience, which is lovely. And on my panel, we have Jennifer from Ipsas, which is a wellness and health organization that works with women to empower women. We have Christina from KPMG Croatia, Ivana, who's the CEO of the Zagreb Stock Exchange, Victoria, who's head of EBRD here in Croatia. We have Villa, who is one of our young change makers of the future. We have the very acclaimed artist Oko, who actually shows in London as well as in Croatia. We have Athena from UNICEF, head of UNICEF here in Croatia, and we have Carla from Solidarna, which is one of the leading NGOs here in the country as well. We're delighted to join all the other panels, including my other colleague Max, who I know is also in London, and we are looking forward to the discussion.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.
So are we. You have a rock star round table there. Thank you, and we will come back to you in about 55 minutes. Now, let's move on to Beirut, where the Arab Institute of Women and its director, Miriam Sphere, is sharing a panel of primarily grassroots activists. Miriam, can you hear us? We can see you. You need to unmute yourself. Miriam, can you hear us? I don't think that Miriam can hear us, but let's move on to Aman. Can Aman Jordan hear us? We will try to connect with Merina Zalbataine, and then we will try Beirut again. Does Injaz hear us in Jordan? I see everyone ready and everyone engaged in conversations, which is fantastic. Hello, Aman.
Across all of your rules and regulations.
Excuse me 1 second. Hi, everybody. We're broadcasting from Amman, Jordan. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Hello, Mary.
Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
We're good. Happy International Women's Day. We'd love to know who are your panelists.
Absolutely. We have a stellar panel today of amazing women from diverse backgrounds. We have Maysa Bataine, who's the founder of Maysam Architects, Reem Abu Hassan, who has multiple roles, but we have her down as the president of the Jordanian Society for Protecting Family Violence Victims. Randa Abu Hassan, the resident representative of UNDP Jordan. Shireen Mahsen, who's the co-founder of Bunny Coffee, an entrepreneur with us. And Dana Soyab, who's the CEO of Mamlaka TV.
That's great. Thank you. And I see that you have already started with your conversation, so we're looking forward to coming back in about 55 minutes and hear your main conclusions from Amman. Thank you, and a big thank you to Injaz for hosting us for the 4th year. And now we're moving on to Dubai. Can Helen hear us? Our panel there is hosted by the UK Pavilion in Expo 2020. And the chair is social entrepreneur and triathlete, Helen Aluzaisi.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and welcome everyone. We are super excited to be here with you today from Dubai Expo 2020 at the UK Pavilion. I have some amazing women. We're all trying to top each other with the fabulous women we have with us today. First of all, happy International Women's Day to everyone with us. Today we have Caroline Faraj, who is the VP of CNN Arabic Services. We've got Diana Hamadi, who is the founder of Diana Hamadi Attorneys at Law. We have Suzanne Stuhlmeier, who is the VP of Communications at Talabat, delivery hero for the international community. We have Roxana Shurizek Gadir, who is an entrepreneur, and she's the founder of Possible X. And we have Fatma Amin, who's a security specialist from Bahrain Petroleum Company. So a very diverse group of people, fabulous women, and I'm super excited to be with everyone today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. I will try to reconnect to Beirut. I hope Miriam this time can hear us. And if not, we will move on to Karachi. Miriam, can you hear us? No, she's not. Let's move on to Karachi.
No, I'm here. I was just unmuted. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, hello, Elizabeth, everybody in London and elsewhere. Good evening, everybody. I'm glad you did that special session with the Ukrainian female to discuss that. I hope next year you will also consider some of the females across the world in Kashmir and Palestine as well to share their thoughts.
Thank you, Muaz.
Good evening. I am Syed Muaz Shah, Director at the Center for Human Rights at Ziauddin University in the Faculty of Law, Politics and Governance. I will host and moderate of the Pakistan panel being hosted by Ziauddin Live. We are joined by members of the public, student, and faculty, as you can see here. And I'm also joined by our panelists, starting from the left, Dr. Masuma Hassan, who is a seasoned diplomat, not only served as an ambassador to Austria, Slovenia, and Slovakia on behalf of Pakistan, but also as the chair for the Group of 77 in the United Nations, and represented Pakistan in the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. She currently serves as a chairperson for the Pakistan Institute for International Affairs, the PIIA, the leading and oldest think tank in Pakistan. We also are joined by Dr. Qureshi, who's sitting in the middle. She is Sarah Qureshi, who traveled all the way here from Islamabad to be with us, Elizabeth. She is the CEO of Aero Engine Aircraft, the first private aviation company in Pakistan that focuses on environmental friendly aircraft engines. She has a successful pilot, and she's going in phase 2 to take it to the skies in an actual plane. And last but not least, we have Tasneem Ahmer, who's the last of our panelists here. She's a veteran with over 25 years of experience in the media, not only as a journalist, but as an advocate for women's rights, gender equity, gender sensitization, and media monitoring. She's the founder of UKS, a research, resource, and publication center dedicated to the cause of gender equity and equality and women development.
Amazing.
So, Elizabeth, we'll connect with you then here
yes,
in a little bit,
Muaz.
to share our thoughts.
We'll be back in about 50-55 minutes to hear what the main findings and calls to action from Pakistan are. Thank you so much. Miriam, are you with us? I say that you... We're trying to connect with you. Yes, it seems, it appears to be a very engaging conversation, but we need you here in the room.
Hi, Elizabeth, I'm here.
Great. So
I'm very sorry about that. I had to interrupt my guests. So hello, everyone. I'm connecting from Beirut. We're at the Arab Institute for Women at the Lebanese American University. We have exceptional change makers with us who are sharing their stories, and I'm very sorry that I had to interrupt them and their insightful deliberations today. So I have with me Reem Badran, who's a university student and the founder of Girl Up Lebanon, and she's a student of ours here at LAU. I have Rachel Dore Weeks with me, who is the head of UN Women Lebanon, and basically a partner of the Arab Institute for Women. We work closely with UN Women. I have Dalal Mawad, who is an independent award-winning Lebanese journalist She currently works for CNN and teaches at Sciences Po in Paris. And I have Nair Rai, who is another colleague of ours. She's currently working with us, and she is co-founder of Harass Tracker, an initiative to fight the normalization of sexual harassment in Lebanon. So this is our panel, and we're having an interesting discussion, and we're going to leave you now to continue the discussion.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Miriam. You Lebanese women are role models, and we admire and respect you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And now let's move back to London and connect with Montessori, MCI, and Max Pescatore. Good
Hello,
afternoon,
Elizabeth.
Max.
Hello, Elizabeth. Hello, everybody. Max Pescatore. I'm the CEO of MCI, part of Montessori Group. In keeping with the international status of our group, we work not only in the UK but internationally. My panelists also reflect not only London, but also 3 other counties within England. And we have one panelist sitting in Rome and the other in Dubai. And they are Molly Kingsley, who is a journalist here in the UK, but also co-founder of an organisation called Us For Them, started in the pandemic, early in the pandemic, to represent the voice of children, particularly as they were experiencing or not experiencing education as we went through that time. Marie Chowdhury, who is sitting in Dubai, a UK qualified lawyer, now a fintech and finance specialist, and she's general counsel for Lean Technologies. Annie Garthwaite, after many years as international corporate comms leader, is now an acclaimed novelist here in the UK. Joan Wazilik, who's sitting in Rome, has spent all of her working career as an international corporate comms executive leader. She's also a guest lecturer and mentors students. And Catherine MacLeod, who is the CEO of Dingley's Promise, which is a group of nurseries here in the UK that specialise with children with special educational needs. But she herself is a passionate advocate and very active in that field, and in fact got her MBE awarded to her for work she did in Asia 10 or 15, 20 years ago. I'm delighted to have them all on my panel today.
Thank you, and we are delighted to have you with us, and thank you for hosting a panel for a second year. And now let's move on to Birmingham, which, as you can see, is a very young panel. Hello, Millie.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for joining us from Birmingham, as you said. I'm here with DebateMate, and I'm being joined by 6 incredible young women from the George Dixon Academy, which is a school local to the centre where we are today. The names of the students with me are Joanna, Amelia, Amandi, Michaela, Sophia, and Karina, and we're really excited to contribute to this conversation and give a youth perspective on how women can really act as catalysts for resilience, diversity, and change.
Wonderful. Well, please mute yourselves now, and we will be back in about 55 minutes. Let's see how the conversations go, and then I will ask you to give us the main findings. It's fantastic to have you all. I can now safely ask you to get back to our seats. I promise I will not get you back the front row for another time, and thank you. So, if we can have the slides on the screen. Welcome, ladies. Amazing to have you.
Completed. Can we go on mute?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind going on mute. So, let me introduce Baroness Lola Young first, starting on my right. You became a professor of cultural studies, a writer, a broadcaster, and a cultural critic, and you have been an independent crossbench member of the House of Lords since 2004, and you have served as head of culture at the Greater London Authority. You've been on the boards of numerous arts and cultural organizations, including the National Theatre, Historic England, and the South Bank Centre. I mean, I could continue with all of you. It's like 1 2-page bios. Thank you for being with us. Khalida Popal. So you flew in today from Denmark, and you're originally from Afghanistan. She began breaking down barriers and empowering women in Afghanistan in 2007, when you helped found the Afghan national women's soccer team. And you served as the team captain, and you later became the first woman ever hired by the Afghanistan Football Federation. When it became clear that you were no longer safe in your country, you went into exile, and you have continued and you are continuing your advocacy for the rights of women and girls by establishing the Denmark-based Girl Power Organization. Regan Rolfe, welcome. You flew in from the US. You are a fellow Conduit member. You will be, as of today. You are the founding president and CEO of the Fund for Global Human Rights. As a young women's rights advocate, you embrace the power of human rights to challenge structural inequality, and you have worked alongside and in support of human rights movements ever since. Prior to launching the fund, you were Vice President for Health and Reproductive Rights at the National Women's Law Center in Washington, D.C. Priya, thank you for coming. You are a venture partner at Marian Ventures. You invest in women-led innovation, and you are an advisor to Chiron Medical Technologies, which is a UK startup using deep learning to transform cancer diagnostics. You used to be a career diplomat, quite a transition, most recently as the British Consul General to San Francisco, and previously in India and Spain. And you were awarded an MBE in 2021 for services to international trade and women in innovation. Lynn Yue. Lynn, welcome. You are a senior executive at Goldman Sachs Asset Management, responsible for managing and growing key relationships across UK international investors. As a senior leader of mainland Chinese origin in London, you help elevate women and ethnic minorities in the workplace. You have been recognized in the Heroes 100 Women Future Leaders by Yahoo Finance, yoo-hoo, for 3 consecutive years. You're a finalist for Asian Women of Achievement and Women in Finance Award as an advocate in 2021. And you have a little daughter. And today is your first day back at work. Wow.
Yes, indeed.
Well, they say that everyone is fighting a battle of their own that we know nothing about. And I always felt that when we ask people to share with us something that we do not necessarily share publicly at conferences and in panels, it helps connect with the audience better. So the way that I would like you to introduce yourselves is by sharing something, a personal story or an anecdote that defined the activist in you, who you have become and why. Is that too difficult? I hope. I hope it is. Lola, would you like to go first?
No. But I will, to help you out, Elizabeth. But first of all, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I know it's customary to say it's an honour and a privilege to be with such distinguished women, but truly it is. And on this really difficult day, and
time in history, really.
Time and history, and listening to people around the world, But all I would say on that is that we've been here many times before and we must not give up hope. But anyway, so a moment. So just to say that I was brought up in the care system, so I can't give you any cosy family anecdotes about my political transformation from, a 10-year-old into somebody wanting to run as Prime Minister, or indeed going to the House of Lords, because I wasn't aware of any of that kind of stuff. But what I was aware of were these big world events that took place in my childhood. And, when you're that small, somehow everything's got to relate to you. So I remember my favourite television programme being interrupted to announce the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I was really fed up with that because I thought, well, I want to watch Take Your Pick, with the Quizmaster and everything. But then there was this chatter around, so there's this climate of fear, and that extended for some time into my childhood and was enhanced by seeing footage from South Africa and from Jim Crow America, of black people being beaten, often by police, which I thought was a force meant to be a force to protect citizens in my naive way as a 11-year-old or whatever. And so I would say that was my political kind of upbringing, that and seeing, although I can't, this is a bit of post hoc rationalization. Looking back, I can see when I watched television, I was both aware that there were no black people and few women around on television, but also not quite aware of what that meant. So again, it was a bit later on that fed into my political consciousness.
Thank you. Quite a story, I'd say. Khalida, what about you? A story that defined you.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. Is it on? That's on now. Is it on?
Is it on, the mic? Yep.
It's on. I think I'm... Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's such a pleasure to be here amongst you and to share a little bit of my story. I think my activism started in a very young age in May, and I always call myself as a natural activist. And it's because maybe where I grew up in Afghanistan, Kabul, Afghanistan, where right now the city and the country is fall in the hand of terrorists, where right now women and girls has lost the right to practice their basic human right. Right now I'm talking here, where in my country, the women right activists, the teachers and doctors are losing their life just because they wanted to live their life and wanted to be active in the society. I grew up in a family where it's many brothers and I have no sister. I didn't want it to be treated differently. I didn't want my family, in a very young age, in my childhood, I didn't want my dad and granddad to bring me different toys and different clothes. I wanted to have a choice. If they wanted to bring any toys and clothes for my brothers, I wanted to have the same. Or if they wanted to bring something different for me, I was always asking, bring me something like it belongs to boys, but also belongs to girls. So I will choose for myself which one I should take. I don't like dolls, bring me ball or bring me cars, because that's what you're bringing to my brothers. And you're not giving me a choice. You're just telling me this is a doll and you should play with that. That was from my childhood. Football came quite natural in me because street football in those countries is quite popular. In Afghanistan, football is a fast game. So I started playing with my brothers just for the fun of the game. But when I grew up and my body was more feminine, there was a pressure from the society that told me I belong to the kitchen but not to the street. And I should not play football and I should stay home and prepare myself to be picked up by a family to get married. And I said, no, I have a choice. I will fight for that and I will continue. And they told me that's not part of the culture. And I said, people made the culture. So cultures are made by people and we are going to make the culture and the history. And that's how we did it.
Thank you. Wow, people make the culture. Regan.
So I was lucky to be born in the United States in a time of change. And so even though I was born into a family that was pretty traditional in many respects, my parents raised me to believe that anything was possible, that barriers did not exist because you were a girl. And at the same time, it was the time when the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement in the United States were showing that when people were unhappy with the systems that they were born into, that they could actually change them by joining together, sometimes taking to the streets and demanding change. So those two things collided for me when I was 14 years old. Up until that point, my parents had told me you can play any sport you want to, you can study any subject you want to. And then when I was 14, I got excluded from something that was available in my town, and my mother took me aside and said, you know, the reason that happened to you is because you're a girl. And my mind was like, wait a minute, 14 years of telling me that this wasn't going to happen, and now you're telling me that all of these things that are happening in the world that are promising to make the world a better place, they haven't actually translated into anything that could save me at this moment. And of course, when you're 14, you're very focused on your own experience, but what that taught me in that moment was that that kind of bravery, that kind of demonstrable fight for change only succeeds if you push it to the next level, and if you're always ready to take up the mantle of justice when you are faced with injustice. Because the truth of the fact is, as we know from the current developments in the United States, is that the battle for justice is unending. And I think that's the moment when I realized it was time to join the fight.
Thank you, Reagan.
Priya.
The example I would use is one from when I was an early career diplomat. So I grew up in a family in the UK, very much like the one you've described, Reagan, where everybody was encouraged to do everything, and I felt that the possibilities were endless. Mixed race family, but for me that was normal because that was my house, so everything else was different, and what I had was normal. When I was a young diplomat posted to Spain, one of the jobs you get as a diplomat is to host visiting ministers. And it was my first time hosting a British minister. It was at a conference, and so I was sort of desperately trying to make sure it all worked perfectly and all the logistics worked and all the practicalities worked. And the minister was called to do a live television interview outside of the conference venue. So I was standing next to him, sort of checking on what we were doing next, making sure the cars were organised and all the practical things, and he was speaking live to camera. What I hadn't realised what would happen is that when he finished speaking live to camera, the camera panned straight over to me, expecting the interpretation, because obviously I was the translator. Now, clearly, obviously, I made something up, being the good diplomat that I am, but hopefully it was sort of just about on message. But I think it was one of the first times for me that actually you realise that you get judged by a very external appearance that someone sees, and in that case, that was somebody who probably could be Spanish, and clearly wasn't a diplomat because they were a girl. And that stayed with me because it actually meant that, you really do need to challenge the stereotypes that people impose on you. And that really stayed with me as something that I wanted to challenge throughout my whole career.
A similar story was shared by Atiya Mahmood. She's our keynote speaker in Pakistan today and a longtime supporter of the mentoring programs. She's a diplomat. And she started off as a diplomat in the 60s in a very male-dominated profession and society. And when she was attending functions, she would always be mistaken for either the ambassador's wife or perhaps the ambassador's secretary. So she had to fight a very long battle to actually establish herself as a leader, of course she became later on in life. So yes, that's a problem. And I think the problem of labeling people easily, it's something that we all need to fight. I mean, this year's theme of International Women's Day is break the bias. And that bias is something that all of us are guilty of, whether we realize it or not. So thank you for this. Lynn.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so delighted to be sharing my perspectives with you today. So I am a Chinese millennial, and then what does that mean? I guess our life was synonymous with the huge economic changes, and then every day of our life was better than yesterday. And we're all born after the one-child policy, so we are a generation of single children. But my journey with the West was really starting when I was about 4 years old. So I vividly remember that moment that I watched this Western TV advert. It was Head and Shoulders shampoo advert. So as intrigued as I was to find out what dandruff really was. And I think I also was amazed by the advancement this commercial represented. It was back then, despite my very young age, I said to myself that I want to see more of that. I want to be part of that world. So it was the same curiosity that drove me through education, learning English, achieving a degree in the UK, as well as working in the City of London for the past 10 years. You can almost say at some level that little girl's dream came true. I mean, at least I don't have any dandruffs. But I guess it's not just my dream. It is my grandparents' dream as well when they lived through the Japanese colony. And it is my parents' dream where they caught the end of the Cultural Revolution and didn't really have access to the same education opportunity. But for us, I think this is an opportunity that we finally have to be on the international stage, to share our perspectives with everyone here. And then, as Elizabeth mentioned, today is my first day back to work on from my maternity leave. And they say when a child was born, so was the mother. And then I think I really want to come back to work with much more intention, much more impact, and then really join the discussion, and hopefully we can inspire some changes.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, very briefly, a story that defined me and perhaps kind of explains why Athena 40 and that global conversation. When I was 14, I used to be a pen pal. Do you remember that organization? So the older generation perhaps will remember it. It was back in the days when we used to write proper letters, you know, the pen and paper and the postman and the, what is it called? The stamps. Thank you. We have forgotten all that these days. But back then, there was so much excitement because you would get connected to peers, I mean, young, you know, peers from around the world. And I would select friends from Thailand, I remember the US, Germany. So I had a wonderful group of diverse friends from around the world, and we would exchange letters, and I would talk to them about my Greek heritage and culture and my reality growing up in Athens, and they would talk to me about, you know, their own experiences and families. And so that exchange was fascinating. I still remember how, you know, the excitement that I was waiting for the letter to arrive. And I think that this is what planted those seeds in me, that I wanted to understand more about the different cultures around the world, because there is so much beauty out there. And so this is when the Athena 40 seeds were perhaps, you know, planted. So I have a very easy question for you, Lola. And then I will take it around the table. That world around us is getting all the more complicated. Pandemics and wars, I think this is a new one, so, oh, it's the same. Flashing red. Flashing red. Would you like to try with? All right. So pandemics and wars, thank you, Rosie, and collapsing systems. How are we going to get out of this mess? Tell us.
Wait a minute. You said it was a simple question. Gosh.
Let's focus on the role of women and how can women...
Oh, that makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? I guess, I suppose my starting point would be, and, you know, as a politician, kind of, I'm sort of practiced in not answering the question you've asked. But I think what I would say is that it's really important to have a grasp of history, even if it's only in kind of relatively general terms. I've been saying this to people a lot in the context of the war that's going on at the moment, and to say that these things don't happen overnight. You know, there's a long tail of history that you can trace back for centuries, actually. And I'm not suggesting that everybody's got to become a sort of, you know, expert in geopolitics or history, but it's really, I think, important to be able to grasp at least the outline of all of that stuff, because people will be telling you all kinds of things, particularly politicians, will be kind of simplifying to the nth are simplifying to the nth degree. That doesn't help us find the solutions, right? So the key thing about finding solutions to me is what are the questions that you're asking that you want to address. And so, you know, how come we've gotten to this point would be a key question. And could it have been avoided? At what other times have we been in this kind of really horrible type of moment? I referred earlier to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which a lot of people have been referring back to. But again, you know, it's not exactly the same. The start of the Second World War isn't exactly the same. And I think it's also worth saying that, you know, as terrible as the conflict is, the war is in Ukraine, and that fight for survival and freedom, we also have to be aware of what else is still going on. It doesn't mean that everything else has ground to a halt. So there are still people, thousands, probably millions of people actually still dying of hunger and malnutrition, and the impact of climate change and so on and so forth. So all of that doesn't make it any easier. And I should say, by the way, also in relation to that climate change issue, when I think back again to the past, some of the older, those who are a bit older will remember Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, or even Daphne du Maurier's short story, The Birds, which was completely nothing like the Hitchcock film at all. It was essentially environmental short stories. So these kinds of issues have been going on for a long, long time. And we still haven't found a lot of the answers. And in my view, that is because we've been asking the wrong questions. And that's partly because the wrong people have been in the position to pose those questions, or to pose the answers to the questions that they think are a priority. So it's a very complicated thing. And actually, I don't think it is as simple as saying, you know, all respect to Paul and everything earlier, but I don't think it is as simple as saying, oh, if we get a load of women in power, that'll be it. You know, it's not going to work that way, I don't think. So, you know, as I say, I can't really answer your question in any kind of concrete terms, but I do know that what we've got now is not inevitable, and I think that's the other thing to say, that the problem with situations like we have now is that politicians will normalise it to the extent that they'll tell you it's absolutely natural to be much more concerned with Ukrainian refugees than it is to be concerned with refugees from Afghanistan or refugees from the Democratic, what's it called in, DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, or whatever. All of these other pinch points are all part of the same problem. So what we have to do is to work out, you know, what the priorities are in terms of addressing those, and where each of us can play a part, no matter how small it might seem. And I think that's also quite important.
Yes, I think that's actually the answer to the question, that we cannot wait for our politicians or the decision makers to change this world. It's on the shoulders of all of us, no matter, you know, how big or small a contribution. Khalida, do you agree? And I was thinking that, you know, suddenly us living in those Western societies, democratic societies, where we never thought that we would experience the prospect of a World War III in our lifetime, and suddenly we have found ourselves on the brink of that. Even, you know, possibility of a nuclear war, that's insane. But you grew up in a society that only knew war, really, or at least for the best part of your life. Correct me if I am wrong.
The past few days, I'm following a lot the news and everything and every behavior around the world. What is happening in Ukraine is really bad. It's humanitarian crisis. It's very similar to any other humanitarian crisis if it's happening in Palestine or it's happening in Afghanistan. It's about human lives. War is taking humans' life and humans' dream, a human beings' country, and people are being displaced. What I'm seeing is the selective empathy, the selective languages for undervaluing one's life over another. I am living as a refugee in Europe, and my girls, the footballers from Afghanistan that we have evacuated since August 2021, they are living as a refugee in Europe and Australia. They are following the news, and what we kept saying to each other, does our life have a value? Is it because we have different color? The language that media is using, the language that is being communicated around us, it is very sad. It is discriminating. It is racism. We are actually, it's a huge evidence today that racism exists in a very serious level, and it's loudly spoken in BBC and CNN and in so many other channels, which is very, very sad. No matter where the war is happening, it's somehow connected with each other. What we need as a human being, and I'm so agree with you, We all play our role in this world, and we have responsibility to communicate, but also raise awareness. We shouldn't be just so selective. If the war is happening in our neighborhood, then all of a sudden it's humanitarian crisis. It's about human beings. It's about humanity. It's about blonde hair and blue eyes life. It's about human beings' life. I lost my country, and I had no voice in decision making. I lost everything, my dreams and everything, and now I'm a refugee, where I have to start my life from zero, where I'm labeled as a refugee, where I face discrimination many times, where my life has never had a value. What is happening in the system right now, where the governments are actually taking the initiative and saying that the refugee process should be within the 24 hours. People's lives matter. They're traumatized. It's fantastic. Why can't we think equally for all human beings? Why can't we have the system equally treating human beings and not valuing up and down each other's life? Because war is connected to us, and in a way, even we turn our faces, it connects with our lives, and it will affect at some point us.
You're raising a tremendous point, Khalida. And this is actually something that I have invited the media panel at the Evening Standard to discuss, because I'm very keen to hear the views of journalists and people in the media who actually are part of shaping the agenda and what is going out, in the public sphere. And it's not always as it should be, I think. So thank you for raising that. Regan, what are your thoughts about? You have been working with social movements, but there's actually a truth in what I said, social media and movements. And sometimes it can be incredibly helpful in getting people take to the streets and begin revolutions, sometimes very dangerous. What is your experience, and what do you think about what Khalida just said?
Well, I'm going to take a page from Lola's book and answer a question that's related, but maybe not exactly the question you just asked me, which is, I think that the tragedy of what Khalida just said is a result of the observation that Lola made, which is that decisions are made on behalf of populations by people who don't worry about the consequences. And that is why I think a part of what both of their comments reflect is a need for ways for populations, communities, constituencies of all kinds, in whatever community they sit, to be active voices and participants in the creation of the system in which they live and the government, which is ultimately accountable to them, not to itself. And the work that we do at the Fund for Global Human Rights is really about supporting the development of local civil societies, because as an American, I'm lucky to live in a country that has a deep and rich tradition of civic activism and civil society. But even so, I'm here to tell you right now that this is not a moment where I am taking democracy and human rights protections for granted. And nor are many of the people who live in the country with me. And I think that lesson is something that we need to take really to heart wherever we sit in relationship to that reality, because there is power in the mobilization of constituencies. That's why governments try to take to demobilize those constituencies. That's why they try to silence them. That's why they take away their rights, to make sure that they can't challenge the established power status quo. And that, I think, is actually a part of the answer for the future, is taking the notion of civil society seriously, support it with, yes, certainly social media creates opportunities that we didn't used to have for mobilization and organizing, but it's about building those institutions to last, so that when governments or other institutions of power want to take away our rights, we have mechanisms, communities, and numbers to resist those movements. And then maybe we can build something that is resistant to the authoritarian trend that we've been seeing across the globe.
Thank you, Regan. I mentioned before when I talked about our democratic countries, and I said, quotation marks perhaps, because I'm concerned that our democracies do not deliver to the people. And there is something very wrong and very flawed in the system. And this is what we need to address. Priya.
So for me, there's two dimensions. And I wanted to focus on the second of these, because I think sometimes it gets missed in debates around International Women's Day. So I think it's self-evident from everything everyone said so far that inclusion is the right thing to do. You know, we have a major problem, partly because people don't have a voice at the table, whether it's from a civil society perspective, whether it's from a gender perspective, whether it's from a minority representation perspective. That is a fundamental challenge. The second bit, though, that's frequently lost in this is that actually, why does that matter? And part of the why is because, and this is proven in repeated studies over time, that decisions are better if they're made with a representative group at the table. In the context of business, in the context where I operate, businesses perform 25% better if they have gender representation in their senior leadership. Businesses perform 31% better if they have minority representation in their senior leadership. So this is not just a debate around inclusivity because it's the right thing to do or it's a nice thing to do. Actually, this is the only way we will actually produce better results, whether that's because a decision's been taken or whether a company's been run more effectively, whether a piece of technology is being designed with the full market in mind. A great example I shared with Elizabeth.
Please share it with
I will. I'll share it with the rest of you because it absolutely horrified me when I saw it. So does anybody here know when the first female anatomical 3D model was designed for medical students? January 2022. So I was absolutely horrified when I saw this. You know, so all of the women in this room, you're being potentially operated on at some point by a surgeon who's trained on a man with the bits removed. Basically, that is what we're looking at. And so, you know, this is, you know, the why is really fundamental. And I think we really need to make sure that the debate is both focused on this is the right thing to do, but also actually this has a huge societal impact if we do this in the right way.
When we circle back, I would like you to give us some insights as to why women do not have as an easy route to accessing capital as men do. But then the second round. Lynn, over to you now. Your thoughts as to, you know, what was just discussed.
I think coming from a country with 1.4 billion people, I thought I was in the majority. But then when I came to the city of London, all of a sudden I became a minority. And then there are two labels, you know, the ethnic minority, but also the gender label. But I think that really provides a very interesting insights. I think some of the dynamics that have been mentioned, for example, where the mainstream Western kind of culture and then the rest of the world. And I see that as a dynamic almost like an elephant and a mouse in the room. So, you know, the elephant can move freely in the room where the mouse have to look at every step of the way in case that it can't, the elephant stepped on it. And I think that is very much this dynamic between the dominating culture from the West and then kind of the rest of the world. So often it feels like, you know, we are the conversation, be it from your country, be it economic significance of China, but we're not part of the conversation. And then that kind of human connection was very little being uncovered here. But I think it's also interesting just to point out, to your point, from at least the business perspective, how you know, the historical or the societal reasons for these things to happen. Because if we look at some of the big organizations in finance today, you know, they were pretty much set up 100, 150 years ago. And by then, they have an ideal worker in mind. And that person is very much a man. And then it's not just a man, it's a white man, it's middle class, it's straight. And then what that means is they will have a very competitive and dominating communication styles. And then they will have very likely put work as their entire priority, and then most likely they have no care responsibilities like looking after children. So these are the organizations that were set up in the first place. So if you walk in and then you fit with that ideal work archetype, then it's very easy for you to access networks, easier for you to find a sense of belonging. Whereas the more you deviate from that, then the harder it is for you. So I think it's important for me, at least, to see some of those structural reasons which can really liberate myself to see I'm actually not the problem. And then, because we were all told to lean in, which is very much about self-improvement, which I don't disagree with, but I do think we need to be one step further. It's not enough just to change the hell out of ourselves. I think it's really to see, you know, what we're facing and then elevate each other and then get the movement going.
When we first talked, you talked to me about these issues, and I said I'm very keen to find a way to, you know, invite you to Athena 40 and engage you in these conversations, because I believe that we need to support each other and give as much voice to each other as we can. Do you feel that women support each other enough? And that's a difficult one for all of us.
So I think you mentioned, so you mentioned about, you know, why women are not in leadership positions enough. Am I? Sorry. This is flashing. I'm so sorry. So I think partially, for me, is women. So when there's a double blind, I suppose. So if you are behaving more feminine, then people would think you're too soft. You're not a leader. But when you are behaving more like men, then people don't like you because you are behaving outside of the gender stereotypes. So I think
you're called a bitch, right?
So I think it's a very narrow kind of bandwidth for women to operate in the first place. And then because there are so few of us in there, so that insights of how to operate within that narrow bandwidth are not getting, it's not very accessible for other women who want to be in leadership positions. But that could also mean that people who are in leadership positions, they have to sort of give up certain things to be in that position. And I think perhaps that might be contributing to the perception that women are not helping women enough, which I don't think is by choice. Again, it's probably the structural reasons, but there is a lot more that we can mobilize and then raise the awareness of helping each other.
Thank you. So we're getting to our final round now because we need to connect to the different cities soon. I was recently reading again Vicky Price's book, Women versus Capitalism, and she's talking about this system which is so patriarchal in its DNA and so hostile towards women. I don't know if Vicky is in the room, but I strongly recommend this book. How can we change that system, and how can we address those issues? What should we be doing, you know, towards politicians and media and the system as a whole?
Oh gosh. Well, I think in theory we have democratic institutions, right, in UK and the US, in theory, and that this is how the West likes to think of itself. And this isn't about bashing the West or whatever, but there is that in theory. So in theory, we get the politicians we deserve. You know, people go to the ballot box. Even if it's only like in the recent by-election, 23% of the voting public actually bothered, I shouldn't say bothered because that's too judgmental, but actually turned up to vote. So what is it that's keeping people away from the ballot box? And also, is there any guarantee that the people who turn out in droves are actually going to be on our side, as it were? So again, I think I've had some interesting conversations with younger people about this, and there's something about the narrative around alternatives to the kind of capitalism that we have that isn't there, and that, you know, that there is this kind of sense, and it's not only about capitalism per se, it's also about conservatism, a certain kind of authoritarianism, and authoritarianism mixed with a curious kind of laissez-faire attitude. So that there's something that's missing in the way we are able to articulate what it is we want and the ways in which we want it. And it's like, so I can say, you know, I'm anti-racist, and it's like immediately you're on a downer, it's a negative, and it's like, so what's the story? You know, the story isn't, oh, well, you know, we love reggae music and jerk chicken, and that means we're not racist. But, you know, what is the story then? What is the story that we're trying to tell? And some of the things that, you know, my colleagues here have said this afternoon are part of that story, but they need to be told in a particular way, in a way that gets through to people. That's what I hope, at least, because otherwise we're all doomed. You know, because we keep repeating these, I would say, errors. We were talking earlier about who might win the next presidential election in the US. So ask Reagan on her view on that one. That'll cheer you up. But seriously, no, again, it's one of those really difficult questions. I mean, as far as I personally am concerned, again, it's a historical thing, and I'm not a historian, so I can't pretend to know all the ins and outs of everything. But from my sort of reading, particularly of Britain's history, is we go back to, I'm sorry, but colonialism. We go back to colonialism as an interesting and important point, not only in Britain's development, but also in the history of Europe. And actually, you can trace back some of the things that are happening around us today in terms of war to that period. And I'm not saying that's the sort of absolute start point, but it's one of the starting points. And you look there and you see that model of capitalism, which is all about extraction from the land, extraction of the people, at the lowest possible or lowest possible payment or no payment whatsoever. And you take as much as you can and you extract, as the European superpower or the East India Company or whatever, you extract the maximum amount of value from that. And you don't give a stuff about, you know, what happens to those people, that land. If you have a world war, then you extract even more from that land. And that model also is responsible, of course, for environmental degradation. So that's why I always say now that if we're talking about environmental sustainability, we absolutely have to address racism and that kind of business model that says you take, because the most important stakeholder you have is not the people. The most important stakeholder you have is shareholders and investors and so on. And that's the model, to me, that's led us to where we are today. And actually, just one more very quick thing. All those so-called disruptors on the tech scene, you know, just follow the same model. Actually, they just make a lot more money out of it. So we've got billionaires and approaching trillionaires rather than millionaires. So it's just wrong. That doesn't answer your question, of course, which is how you combat that. So I'm going to pass the mic on.
There is not a yes or no, there is not one single solution, but just to add a point that it's not only our political systems or our economic systems that promote patriarchy. Religions are not less guilty. Every god is a male, except for the Dodecatheon, right? The ancient Greek gods. But every religion actually has a male god, and correct me if I am wrong.
Hinduism. Yeah? You've got loads of amazing kick-ass women in Hinduism.
But the most malevolent religions, or the most malevolent aspects of religion, get played out through capitalism too.
Absolutely.
Absolutely part of that machine.
Yes.
The fundamentalist Christian right.
Very true, yes. Khalida, what are the most pressing challenges for the female leaders of the future? And of course, I know that this is not a question that can be answered, you know, in a similar way or in the same way, rather, across all countries. And this is why we're having these conversations today, because we need to understand what is going on across the different societies. But what would you say are the most pressing challenges for female leaders today?
I think it's the system, the culture, how it's built. And it's like a lot of barriers still exist, no matter if it's like in Middle East or it's in Western world. There is always challenge, especially for women, lack of opportunities. And that's why I also put women against women. But the patriarchal culture, I think what I'm trying to also learn, like been realizing in my life, how can we go back and unlearn the patriarchal culture that taught us a lot and learn what is it, like empower the femininity and empower the the power that women has, and then communicate it with our sisters, with the younger generation, because our generation were taught that this is like how we should compete, we should walk in different way, that because the man should accept us, or we can get a table, a chair in the table if we do certain things that a patriarchal culture will accept. I think it's going back, unlearning, and understanding, but also changing the language, the culture that is made for women, that should be always second. We can change it. The only way for the change is to stand together, to understand, and to unlock the potential, but also opportunities for each other, but also have our male allies with us who believe in empowerment, who believe in gender equity, and stop competing with men. That's what also like football is actually also taught me. Stop competing with men. We are not competing. No, like I don't want to compete with my brother because he is good in so many things and I'm good in so many things. Sometimes I'm better. I don't want to compete and I don't want to be compared with.
Of course. I mean, it's not about comparing. I think that comparison leads us towards the wrong path. It's about crafting and creating your own journey in life and not thinking about the barriers which all genders actually have to address, but thinking about the prospects. I think it's time to try and connect to the different cities, and then we will come back in the room and we have the opportunity for live Q&A. Do you think we can try to link to the Evening Standard panel and Doug Wills? Hello, Doug. Can the Evening Standard panel hear us?
Oh, no, I'm still. Oh, you want to put it? Yeah. It comes through diplomatic to that.
Hello, hello. There you are. We can see you.
Right, I'm going to go. Oh, we can see us!
I think we need to mute Birmingham. Thank you so much. Doug? Okay, well, you cannot hear us. And so, Miriam, can you hear us? Hello, hello, Miriam? Well, I'm pretty sure that everyone is very engaged in their conversations. Hello, hello. Doug? Hello? Okay, so let me ask my team, Katerina and Katie and Freddie. Yes. Hello, Miriam. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Hi there.
Yes.
We're very, very keen to hear about the conversation in Beirut.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about very many issues related to gender justice, related to militarism, related to the portrayal of women in the media, the sexist portrayal of women, the importance of women carving a space for themselves on the level of decision making, the importance of feminist solidarity, countering patriarchy, the importance of basically countering everything related to women's representation and the biased way in which women are represented in politics. Our panelists spoke about their experiences vis-a-vis handling gender justice issues from an international perspective, from a journalist perspective, from activist perspectives. We had a young student who spoke about the importance of countering a lot of things related to migrant domestic workers. One of them is the kafala system. We had a discussion also on the importance of sexual harassment and countering sexual harassment via Harass Tracker. So basically a lot of discussions and important deliberations that boil down to one thing. We also had our executive director talk about the importance of having International Women's Day as a practice that we do every day and not just, and that's exactly what we do at the Institute. So the panelists reiterated the importance of feminist solidarity, the importance of youth activism, the importance of journalism in making women's voices heard, in basically the importance of women in decision-making positions, and the importance of countering everything related to gender-based violence. I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam. And now let's go to Amman. Mary Nazal, can you hear us?
Yes, Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. We had an excellent panel discussion here, so I'll just summarize a few points for you. So we spoke about the need to create a happy and safe work environment for women, where stereotypes are not allowed to be verbalized. We spoke about the guilt that women feel when trying to manage their multiple roles, both personal and professional. We spoke about stereotypes as well a second time, but specifically about women themselves recreating stereotypical images about themselves. We spoke about the need to listen to women, like I just mentioned, listen to their needs and wants. We spoke about the importance of legislation. We spoke about COVID being disproportionately harsh on women, and that we need more gender-focused projects and funds, and we need to integrate gender equality into Jordan's national economic strategy. We spoke about the fact that the world is moving at a very fast pace, especially towards the digital era, and that we need to be able to keep up with that, the future of work and so on. We spoke about the gender gap in the workforce. We spoke about authenticity and how important it is to remain compassionate and empathetic. And I have a lovely quote here: women can change their world even if they can't change the whole world. A theme that came out a lot was how women are usually shy about their successes and achievements, and that we shouldn't be. We should own, our achievements. And the Ambassador of Canada also spoke to that. We spoke about Jordan being a conservative community and how we have to work within that reality, and we have to work within shifting that mindset. But there was a sense of optimism that we have gone through the door and progress is happening, even though it may be happening slower than we would like. And we spoke about, I want to leave that. Having women executives, does it make a difference for young women? I think the consensus is that it does. And the power of knowledge, we spoke about the power of knowledge and confidence to break gender stereotypes. And I think a final point is that we need to stop being apologetic. We should fight labels. We need to set limits. And an interesting point is we need to stop being defined vis-a-vis our relationship to men. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We endorse all your findings and main points in Amman. Thank you very much. Can we now go to Birmingham and connect to Millie?
Thank you very much. We had a fantastic debate in our room with three really pertinent themes coming to the forefront. The first was all around framing and language, the second around scale, and the third around what kind of actions do our young people want to see. Well, on the topic of framing, we think it's really important that when we're looking at gender issues, we approach it from an intersectional lens, and that we're aware of all of the injustices that are happening around the world and how actually the sort of gender movement can exist to uplift and empower women from a real diversity of backgrounds. We think it's really important not just to have diverse women at the table, but also to critically analyse, are they able to speak when they're there, and what opportunities are given once you are in the room. And finally, just on that point, we think it's really important to emphasise the need for internal allyship and women of diverse backgrounds supporting each other, learning from each other, and pushing the movement forward. On the questions of scale, we talked about change that can happen at a household level through conversations with siblings, with friends, with people in your own communities, and actually that then cascades and can create greater change. But we also talked about the importance of language in the classroom and how the expectations and the sort of biases that you learn, both consciously and subconsciously, in the classroom environment really go on to impact aspiration and action in later on in life. And we think that we need to look at that area too. Finally, on actions, the young people in the room today, they spoke about the need for role models. You can't be what you can't see. We talked about uplifting and spotlighting the fantastic work that is being done, alongside looking at our media. How do we represent women more broadly, and how can we really showcase fantastic work that they're doing? A very final point was made about the need for male allyship. and especially in those in positions of leadership, high-profile positions and political leaders, calling on them to address some of their own biases and really uplift women from all backgrounds.
Thank you very much, Millie. And is Karachi, can you hear us, Karachi? Moaz. Atiya, I see her nudging you. Hello, Moaz?
Hello, Elizabeth. Apologies.
That's all right. We're getting on with you, Max. So we're getting back to London, and then we will try to link again to Karachi.
Okay, thank you. I'll do my best here to sort of summarise for my panel discussion, which was very rich, and actually some of the points that we made resonated with some of the things I've just been hearing right now. So I'll try not to repeat where possible. A very broad discussion. We talked about the home and the home being the start of everything, and having positive mother role models in the home supported by a positive father role model was extremely important for setting a nurturing environment for young men and young women. We talked around the systemic issues that are related with working structures. So working women are disadvantaged. The system doesn't allow them to necessarily get the right jobs in the right places when they need that. The structures around childcare and support, as we know, are not as good as they might be. And then when once in the workplace, there are further barriers that are sort of exist that just either stop a woman from working the way she wants to, or indeed prevent her from, in fact, developing her own career path. And in that context, language was felt to be very important. So words like bossy and ambitious, which are used to downplay women's characteristics, should be replaced with, more positive sounding words that you more probably use within a male context. The financial disparity that women have compared to men was also seen to be something that needs to be tackled, and as a barrier that's so large, it does stop women from becoming empowered. Women should help other women by amplifying women's voices. So something that came up in last year's panel about leaving the ladder down behind you was essentially sort of reiterated this time round. We each have a responsibility to amplify the voices of other women and use all tools and opportunities that we have at our discretion to enable that to happen. The importance for women to feel and be authentic, so to lead in a way that's natural for them, to dress in the way that makes them feel comfortable, to speak using words that make them feel as if they're properly communicating, etc. Moving on, women tend, so in terms of enabling young women to step into leadership space, confidence was something that we feel needs to be nurtured at a young age, and to move away from this ideal that girls or women need to be perfectionists in order to be successful and to have confidence. There's a lot around image, the image of women in social media, the image of women and around the place, and that those images need to better reflect the positive role models that we want to be and see. We also recognise that pandemic, whilst has been a terrible journey for most people, with every journey there's also a positive, and so there are opportunities for young women and women to step into spaces and make them their own. I think that probably covers most of the main points.
Thank you. A very rich conversation. Thank you very much, Max. And I think that Doug is now with us. Doug, how did your panel go? And I have to say, you look content, which is good, but I have to say that on our side, we have been quite critical about the role of media and how media portrays women and whether, there's equal representation. Sorry, I don't mean to attack at all.
Okay, well, in fact, I think the biggest criticism of media is that we look upon ourselves all the time, and our panel did that. And in fact, the panel was varied. And one person I didn't mention earlier was Bianca McConey, who is a young journalist who has recently came through an apprenticeship here. And Avianca is her early 20s. And it was interesting that the parallels between her view and those of other more senior journalists who were also on the panel. And they agree that it's getting better, but Avianca was particularly saying she thought that there was a lack of rapport between some of the women with those with different skills and backgrounds, and that if they interacted more and gave support. And it was interesting what was said by some of your other panelists about mentors and mentoring, which obviously is something that you, Elizabeth, are very keen on pushing. This actually helps and bridges the gaps. The other point was that I heard one of the other panelists saying was listening, and everybody agreed that listening was actually one of the most important things, and listening and giving space and creating opportunities for women, particularly after children. That's returning to the industry, coming back at the same level. And that was another important point. And that went in media, but also outside of media, in politics. And many of those around the panel said they wouldn't go into politics because of the social media criticism of women, particularly women of color, and that the social media took a lot of blame for the antagonism and actually verbal assault almost. And this was felt very strongly by all ages, by the younger and the more mature. So social media still needs to get its act together. But the last word was be aware of the danger of complacency, because while things have increased, there is particularly more room for improvement. And don't be complacent. The fact that there are now women editors of several national newspapers, there's still a dearth of women executives, according to the panel that we had here.
Thank you, Doug. Well, social media, I call it a beast, and it is very difficult to control or to contain, and there needs to be some self-regulation there, and something that the owners need to look more seriously into, because it poses serious threat to our democracies. But the mainstream media, I think we all of us expect to see more representation and more diversity of voices in mainstream media. Thank you so much for these insights. Okay. And moving on now to Karachi. Muaz, yes. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, some of the themes that we discussed were actually very similar, particularly this last theme that was shared by London panel, particularly on media and media representation, that we don't have women editors within our panel at the different news organizations. So as such, that was a key point that was mentioned. In respect to media, there was also a reference to, is it increasing the divide or bringing people together, regardless of gender? And we kind of spoke a little bit about the element of inclusivity. And so that was something, and of course, gender sensitization was a key area that was discussed, that often at times when people may perceive something, particularly in language, there's a very famous slogan that's very popular in Pakistan when it comes to Women's Day by Aurat March, that's called Mera Jism Meri Marzi, which means my body, my choice. And sometimes these words are misinterpreted, as one of our panelists, Tasneem Ahmed, said that this actually sometimes gets misunderstood to mean something like free sex, which actually in reality, it actually is a place of anger. And there's a lot of back history to this that oftentimes that people don't sensitize themselves to. There was a discussion with Dr. Sarah Qureshi about breaking barriers that have never been broken. And not only that, but scientific barriers, as she's works in science and the development of jet engines, and the challenges of being the only women on that. And she shared some certain skill sets that are important for young women to kind of take away from that, to be persistent, have self-esteem, faith in themselves, fulfill the societal roles, but yet value time and make good use of the opportunities. There was a discussion that was interesting because we kind of went back to a lot of stories that was shared, and there was something that was discussed, the mom guilt, and that's often at times how women are in career, and sometimes that's partly from society, and sometimes that is actually built within. Dr. Masuma shared a very moving story about her experience not only leading Aurat Foundation, which is the leading women's rights foundation in Pakistan, in various political, economic, and against empowerment, but also violence against women. So she spoke about how women, didn't even have a right to vote in some of the rural areas here in Pakistan. And I know some of the capitals may not realize that as an issue that they may be facing, but the reality is in the different geographic spaces where we are, there's different challenges for that. What can be done? Of course, education is a must for everybody, for a cause, and any other influences such as politics or religion. World is changing fast, but people are neglected in the observations of change. Women education is a key priority. We also spoke about how profession and career should be gender neutral, and then how the capacity of women is all there, but it's the right attitude and the encouragement that's missing. And what's really interesting is towards the end, we had a discussion on inclusivity and how men can play a role. Dr. Masuma shared about her experience. She not only had some advice for the young women where she said that, persistence and perseverance is key, and being very grateful and not being arrogant. And often at times that we sometimes forget that we are in a society that has men and women. And so one of the key things that was spoken about how men are providing these spaces and support. And that's a role that young men and men who are in the audience and those listening can really take to create those spaces to provide that support. So that's it, and pretty much a lot of the same themes that you have echoed. And I guess I'll
a wealth of
back to you.
ideas and thoughts and concerns. Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate and say hello to all your panelists in Karachi. And finally, let's go, not finally, we have Zagreb and we have Dubai. I see that Leonor is ready to connect with us now. Hello, Leonor.
So, hello from Dubai. We have actually...
Thank you.
Do you want us to go first in Zagreb, or do you want Dubai first?
Let's go with Dubai first, and then we close with you, Leonor. Thank you.
Okay.
Helen, all ears. Is Dubai listening? Can you hear us?
No? Yeah.
Hello,
Okay.
Dubai?
Yeah, okay, so some of the key things that we talked about in Dubai was actually the most recent legislations and the changes in the laws in the UAE that do protect women and give women certain privileges or what we consider rights, such as equal pay and the paternity and maternity leave and things like that. We also talked about NGOs and civil society organizations and how they can support the role of women and women empowerment at all levels. So we were questioned about, are we living in a bubble talking about women empowerment when there are people in disadvantaged areas, that this is not even a choice for them. And so we discussed the impact that NGOs and civil society organizations can have. We were talking about empathy and emotional intelligence as keys for leadership, and this is a strength that women have that we can really capitalize on. Being unapologetic, and they said that they talked about the same thing in Amman, but being unapologetic and taking the time to have a life as well as work. I'm going to just quickly just highlight some of the key findings from different panelists. Caroline was talking about women needing to know their rights to be able to challenge if the issues that they are facing. Suzanne was talking about the women going forward, how you can be professional, talented, as well as a mom. And juggling, but being unapologetic, like we said earlier. Diana was talking as a lawyer from the legislative areas that have changed in the UAE, but also the GCC being very progressive with the rules around empowerment and employment laws. And then we had Roxana, who told us a bit about studying engineering in Poland, and we think this is just a Middle Eastern issue, but actually it is a global issue. And especially when she was working in finance and the biases when it comes to specific industries. Fatma, who is a cybersecurity specialist, was talking about her passion for technology and the fact that she needed to prove herself as a woman in a man's world. The overriding theme was very similar to everyone else all around the world, and we talked about the cultural biases that are intrinsically built in us from a very young age, but also the need for us to continue to change the conversation. And whether we think it's a small bubble, it's actually got a ripple effect on everyone everywhere. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Over to you.
Thank you, Helen. And let's close with Zagreb. And then we come back in the room here for some Q&A.
Okay. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you. So we had a very rich conversation here, and we could have gone on for hours and hours and hours. It was a very interesting conversation. I think we can group our we were very similar in some of our conclusions, and I think we can group them into a couple of things. I think the importance of having role models was stressed, and role models are not just role models in society. Croatia does need more female leaders, women in senior roles, but also parents, having family who will support us, both girls and boys, in following our dreams. We talked about stereotypes and why they are true, but they're not complete. I think that was a fantastic phrase that was used. And we talked about how we should show our achievements as women and share them, and we shouldn't be held back by the biases of society in order to be able to do what we want to do. We talked a lot about it being both about girls and boys, and about mothers having a role to play in how they bring up their sons, and fathers and how they bring up their sons. So it is a conversation for all of us. We did, particularly here in Croatia, sort of talk about the difficulties facing women who become mothers, and juggling that, sort of balancing that between having a family, bringing up a family, and having a career, and particularly for mothers that may have children with special needs, how difficult that is, and how they are judged by society and often by their peers, and why that shouldn't be the case. And obviously we talked about education, and especially social and emotional learning, the need to show emotions, to have empathy, to be able to self-care, that activism, I like the phrase, activism is self-care, and empower young girls to have that self-esteem. And that has to start at an early age, but we did say that it has to be both boys and girls. It has to be a conversation by both. So thank you very much for allowing us to take part.
Thank you, Leonor. Yes, it has to be all gender conversation, actually. And we're coming back to this room. Thank you to all cities for all participation and supporting Athena 40 and these conversations, and the rich insights that you have shared, which are going to be turned into a white paper and distributed across the networks. And all of you. Lynn, I know you have to go because you need to pick up the little one, yes?
Correct.
Yes.
She's
But a final
thank you
message.
so much for having me. Thank you so much. So it makes my first day return from maternity leave extremely special. And then she's at the work nursery, so I do have to go back and see her. But I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation, especially on the topic of work-life balance. That I have quite a bit thinking on that. So I look forward to continue the conversation. And then thank you so much.
What's her name, your daughter's name?
Sophie.
Sophie, lovely. So we're celebrating Sophie because she is the future.
Thank you so much. And then let's all create a better future for the next generation, shall we? But thank you so much for putting together such a wonderful event. I'm just so grateful to have a voice, to be part of the conversation for once. So I'm grateful, and thank you for that.
And then if I can invite you for questions and your thoughts and interventions, because this is very much, well, shall I? No, that's all right. How about here? Yes? Shall we see?
Yeah, maybe stand like you do, and then you can come.
We stand? Whatever you say. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. See you soon. Thank you. Thank you. So who would like to go first? Yes, Sarah, there we go.
Hi, thank you, ladies. Thank you for sharing your experiences today. My question, oh, sorry.
Oh, you go first.
Yes, she can go first.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead. So, Zahra, you go first, and then your name. You go first.
When I'm sort of kind of listening to the discussion and all the very diverse experiences that all the ladies shared, and some ladies who've been at the front line of, what's happening in Afghanistan, which is, I agree, a huge humanitarian crisis, which has kind of not been given the importance that it should have. How do you think that governmental organizations can work in partnership with the private sector and third sector to work on the structural areas that can actually address some of the issues that we've spoken about that can bring about change? Because as you mentioned, governments on their own have their different agendas. They haven't really succeeded in addressing the rights of women and abuse of those rights. Private sector is kind of very, to a large extent, focused on profit making. So where it suits those objectives, it will support women, but where it doesn't, it doesn't. And the third sector needs a lot of support. It cannot do it by itself. It needs funds from the private sector, and it needs the government behind it. So what can we do? Is it a combination of lobbying efforts, advocacy, getting the private sector involved? So almost putting together a collaborative platform of these three different types of organizations with women at different levels who ensure that some of these issues are kind of a win-win situation for the decision makers. Because right now, the decision makers, they don't really care, because it doesn't, by not caring about these issues, doesn't affect them, The large or corporates, they need to still report to their shareholders in terms of the monetary purposes.
I think that more companies in the private sector understands that they need to become more accountable to society, and so give up that shareholder focus to more the stakeholder focused approach. Who would like to take that? This is more, I think, for you, Regan.
Oh, great. Okay. Now I know what it's like to be the first person to get asked a huge question. Yeah, I mean, I think you actually sort of answered your own question in the sense that if we're going to change the systems in our societies that oppress women or other people, it's going to require everyone who holds power in those societies to shift their practices in line with different values. But I don't think that just happens. So I think that I think Elizabeth is right, it's changing. So you have new generations of people who are coming along who bring different values and ask different questions to the table. You have corporate actors like Apple, who on the one hand is associated with a lot of negative aspects of corporate practice in supply chain abuses, but also is actively supporting civil society to try and hold governments accountable for improving protections in supply chain communities. So there is change happening, and I think the important thing is to recognize that we all have a role to play. Government actually needs to be actively leading on a lot of issues, but we as citizens need to hold our governments accountable for doing that leading. And we also need to find those allies in institutions that have traditionally been, if not enemies, then at least outside the conversation, and start bringing them in. Because I think, as you can see from the diversity of backgrounds of the people on this panel, we're all here to participate in this conversation from those very different backgrounds, and we could probably all do something much bigger together than we could do by ourselves.
And also changing the law, because often people only will do something if they're forced to do it because they have to comply.
Which is, it's not an easy part to change the law, because as you mentioned, it's decision makers who actually perhaps, favor that system. And you wanted to make an intervention on that, please.
Yes, thank you. And I think you very admirably answered your own question, actually, by talking about sort of coalition, I think you said, or collaboration, and in conjunction with what Reagan's just said. And I would support this, and I can't even believe I'm saying this all the time, but I've come across many businesses that are far more progressive than our government, actually, in terms of looking at these issues around the environmental sustainability piece, the social piece, and so on. So I'm really interested in how we can activate and agitate from the outside and from within those companies. When we introduced the Modern Slavery Act in 2015, there's a section on transparency in supply chains, and it was business in the main, it's a bit of generalisation, but business in the main agitated for that section against the government. The government didn't want it, and that was exactly about making business accountable. Now, also the point about that is when you talk about legislation, yeah, legislation is great. If you implement it, if you monitor how it's working, and if you actually have the guts to use it. So we've got that section 54 on transparency in supply chains, but nobody's been brought to book for not having a statement or for not fulfilling the demands of that section. So, you know, you really have got to make sure, as I say, to agitate and activate from inside and outside.
Thank you, Lola. One more question, because we're running out of time, unfortunately. The lady in the grey blouse, hello there. Please state your name.
Hi, my name is Hedvig Sandbu. Thanks. I wanted to pick up on something that Khalida, you spoke about, something I've really been feeling the past couple of weeks, which is this sort of selective empathy, and the fact that we are living in a racist society, and something that I've really felt this deeply for myself, but also in the conversations I've been having the past couple of weeks, that for some reason, and I think part of that reason is racism, or not just racism, I would say, I guess it's the human bias that for a white person like myself, that somebody who looks like me, like a Ukrainian person who basically could be my cousin or my uncle or my brother or sister, we have an inherent kind of high level of empathy to those people. And I basically, I think my question is, and also Lola, you mentioned about sort of colonialism, and we have all of these kind of inherent or inherited structures that we've really had for like centuries at least, if not, I don't know, millennia. So do you think, is there a role in kind of bringing about these, I think, empathetic conversations, but also really honest and deep conversations about these really difficult topics? So that's my question.
Who would like to take that? Khalida, would you like to take that?
I think you mentioned, like you answered yourself, it's just kind of like being honest and sharing like how it feels to feel like devaluated or devalued. Your life have no value, or your life has less value. That's what I have been trying to do the past few days and weeks. I'm just trying my best to raise my voice and say, listen, what you're doing is like fantastic. It's great, because we have to stand for humanity. We have to support each other. We have to hold governments or people in charge accountable. But what is the most important thing is that we have to understand our biases, and also how can our humanity, that we are standing for humanity or actions for humanity, shouldn't like, with our actions, shouldn't like kind of speak that humanity only belongs to Western or with only Europeans. And that's the word that's used, and like whatever happening the other side, it's not belong to us. And then I share my story and also my feeling, how it feels. And that's how I think people understand. We understand, like, we are in a very difficult situation. What is happening around the world is so crazy. Sometimes my friend says, there's so many causes in this world, I don't know which cause I should take and stand for. That's like understandable. We have to understand each other and respect each other, but also give the opportunity to learn and understand without attacking and criticizing, because we have these biases within ourselves, no matter where we are from.
Can I just add something? One point, that if we don't do that, we are doomed as a species. Things are very serious. Am I right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think, you know, it's a very good question, and I think you're absolutely right that we all learn our biases, and I think that's where the emphasis is. We learn, and what is quite clever about some of those people that feel that it's right to be biased is that they've naturalized it. They make it sound like, and they make it feel like it's natural to do that. You know, just on a very kind of basic level, I fell over in November, really thwacked myself on the pavement. People didn't look at me and say, oh, that's a black woman, I ain't going to help her up. You know, people came and helped me up and make sure I was all right and everything, and so on and so forth. It doesn't take, you know, you can be empathetic with somebody who doesn't look like you. It's actually quite easy. I feel the pain and the hurt of the Ukrainian people. I feel the pain and the hurt of the Afghani people, particularly the women, and so on and so forth. But if you think about how that difference is really important, the different ways in which we're still treated. You've only got to think of the Windrush scandal in this country to understand how people regard one set of migrants, in inverted commas, as compared to another. And we fall into that trap. And I'm telling you, you know, some black people and brown people fall into the same trap because, as you said, we're not immune to these biases of thinking, well, you know, we're better than them and therefore we should be at the front of the queue. I heard a lot of that stuff during the whole awfulness of Brexit, right? And so, you know, so how do we counter those? It goes back to what I was saying before, that's not the only solution. We've got to produce much better stories about, and much better narratives, much better ways of explaining that these things aren't inevitable. And just finally, it's really interesting, people will often talk about this Darwinian concept, and that's why it's natural, right? You know, nature, red and tooth and claw and all of that stuff. And it's kind of a little highway and byway of sort of critical thinking over the years, but there were people who contested that theory, not on the grounds that they didn't like the idea of being descended from monkeys or whatever, but they drew attention to other parts of the world than the place where Darwin based his theories, which is in this highly competitive, you know, jungle, tropical forest, where there is that kind of fighting for the resources. In other nature contexts, animals and different species and so on work together, you know, or within the species they work together and they help and support the weak. It's not uniform. People are very selective about the examples they use to make the point about the naturalness of bias and prejudice.
Thank you, Lola. I know we're pressed with time, but I don't like leaving questions unanswered. And I raised something before. This is a very entrepreneurial audience here. And I want to go back to the point which I raised before. In terms of accessing VC funds, what is it that keeps women away from it? Is it a matter of trust? Is it a matter of something else? Bias? I would like to invite your final comments and insights before we close.
Okay, I'm going to answer the question, but also a brief comment on the previous one, which is that if you look at the studies of kids when they're sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, they actually don't see difference. It's incredibly fascinating. So society builds that difference. And I think I will answer the second question by my answer to this one, which is that, you know, for me, the bias in something like investment in female-led companies is because there is so much systemic bias in the system. And if I may just add my sort of small soapbox parting shot, I think we need to really move away from the perception that the issue is with the woman. So the woman has to do confidence training, or the woman needs to have advice given from a senior person who can tell her how to improve herself in order to get the seat at the table. It's really demonstrated, I think, in the whole conversation that we've had, that these biases and prejudices that we have in society are built up over centuries. And all of those institutional biases are the ones that need to be addressed. And that's where I think, you know, we all have an opportunity to actually really make a change in our own environment, however big or small that might be, because actually we all see those fundamental structural barriers. So, you know, the next time in your organization someone talks about you going on a sort of confidence training course, please just tell them that you want a sponsor rather than a confidence training course, because that's actually how we just change the system. It's pretty fundamental for me.
Thank you, and I would like to thank everyone, but before I do that, I would like, and he's going to hate me for it, to invite Sebastian Better. Thank you, Sebastian. Please come over. He's the photographer that has taken those amazing
Oh my God.
portraits. He doesn't like to be in the spotlight, but I really think that he deserves a big round of applause because...
Well, public speech is one of my specialities. So actually, I don't want to say too much. It's not about me. It's about the pictures and the most inspiring stories I was able to tell, or I hope I could able to tell through my photography. And yeah, I want to thank Elizabeth as well for enabling me to meet all these women.
Is there one thing that you have learned by working with women over the past, I don't know, 1 year?
Well, I think I'm doing portraiture photography for a bit longer than 1 year already, and I think the reason why we came together and did that was because I was photographing a lot of women, and especially within the Middle Eastern diaspora, since the last, for the last 4 years, I guess. So, well, I mean, I guess probably the best is to read the interview, which hopefully is, I don't know, distributed through the social media channel of the Conduit or yours.
It is, but I think that what we discussed when we went on this project, decided to embark on this project, was that importance of highlighting and promoting diversity, and that complex nature of women that has a uniqueness, and at the same time, in a magical way, is connecting us all to each other and also eternity. It's a little bit philosophical, but we need the philosophical approach in life. Anyways, we need to close this session. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and supporting on International Women's Day, Athena 40. Thank you for joining us. And a huge thank you to the Conduit Club and the team, Freddie, Rosie, Alicia, everyone. Thank you for your hospitality. And Paul Van Zyl, thank you.